Welcome everyone, my name is Rubies and today I bring you a new episode of Assassin's Creed The Real History, the series where we compare the representations of characters, factions, events, and locations depicted within one of the Assassin's Creed games to their actual history. Please be warned of major story spoilers ahead. For today's episode, we'll be exploring the history of the French silversmith François-Thomas Germain. To start, we will explore his background during his pre-game history. Then we will cover his life in Assassin's Creed Unity during the in-game history, and lastly we will summarize the differences between his actual life and his portrayal in the game. François-Thomas Germain was born in 1726 to Thomas Germain and Anne-Denise Gauchelet. His father was a master silversmith who became King Louis XV's royal silversmith and therefore catered to him and other members of allied royal families. Very little is known about François-Thomas Germain's youth, however it has been shown that he followed in his father's footsteps and became adept in silversmithing. His father eventually died in mid-1748 and, after mourning the loss of his silversmith, the king appointed François-Thomas Germain to his position within the following 6 months. Continuing his father's work, he officially became the royal silversmith and sculptor to the King of France, at which point he moved into the Louvre. François-Thomas spent his following years crafting tableware, chandeliers, and many other objects both for the King of France and for the court of other royals, such as those in Russia and Portugal. It is stated by some that he began to live beyond his means financially. At this point, it is recorded that in 1765, Germain defied the guild regulations when he worked for financiers in exchange for clearing some of his debts. The reason this was unacceptable was because he joined the guild under the pretense that he could only enter partnerships with other smiths, and therefore, due to this betrayal, he was forced to resign, and soon after, Germain officially declared bankruptcy. It would have been around this point, in 1789, where we first briefly met Germain in Unity, as Arnaud mistook his carriage for Monsieur de la Salle's as he head to the Estates General. Historically speaking, it is said Germain faded away from public attention after being disgraced, and that he eventually died in 1791 at the age of 64. Interestingly enough, however, despite this character clearly being a representation of the silversmith François-Thomas Germain, many point towards the fact that his in-game representation was also based off the Count of Saint-Germain, and therefore I will cover a bit of his history as well to explain why this is believed. This man was supposedly born around 1712, and apparently took many names aside from the Count of Saint-Germain, such as the Marquis de Montferrat, Count Weldon, and Comte de Bellamare, among many others. This individual's origins are rather vague, and he even made claims throughout his life that he was actually 500 years old, which could be considered an interesting tie-in into Unity, since François-Thomas Germain was demonstrated to be a sage. Historical records show the Count popping in and out of history during different parts of his life. Some earlier records claim that he was in England in 1745, where he participated in writing operas until his later arrest on charges of espionage during the Jacobite Rebellion, which were later dropped. In addition, during these years in England, he spent some time with Horace Walpole, the son of the first Prime Minister of Great Britain, Sir Robert Walpole. By 1748, Saint-Germain arrived in France, and within a year he began working for King Louis XV as a diplomat. A notable case in which he was involved was a 1760 visit to Holland during the 7 Years' War, where he attempted to organize peace talks between France and Britain. The French disagreed with his points and eventually ordered his arrest, which he avoided by fleeing to England with the help of the Dutch diplomat. The next major record of his life showed him moving to Altona in 1779, where he befriended Prince Charles of Hesse-Cassel. It is said he confided in the prince, who was very interested in mysticism, and he was gifted with a factory and laboratory where he could apparently work on experiments related to alchemy. The Count of Saint-Germain eventually died here in early 1784. As I stated, his history is rather scattered, and it is difficult to discern fact from fiction as he consistently evaded questions about his personal life and past by instead telling wild stories. In summary, when considering both the individual he directly presented and the other figure he is associated to in the game, there are still a few differences between François-Thomas Germain's in-game representation and the real history. First, I'll start with the obvious. He was not a member of the Templar Order, nor was he a sage. Second, when considering either of the possible sources of information for the character, he seems to have been portrayed far younger in the game, since he should have either been 63 years old or up to 77 years old, depending on which figure he represented most when he was first met in Unity. Third, the actual François-Thomas Germain died in 1791 of unknown causes, while the Count of Saint-Germain died in 1784, instead of being killed by Arnaud d'Orléans in 1794. Lastly, it should be noted that he had nothing to do with controlling the French Revolution or the execution of Louis XVI, as the king historically outlived him. Now, despite these rather major historical changes, I'd like to note a few points of interest that I found during my research. When thinking back to Germain's loss of his position of silversmith when he was forced to resign from the guild due to his actions, some parallels can be made to the game when Elise refers to his dismissal from the Templar Order during her youth. Then, she seemed to be under the impression that he had died, which would have fit with either François-Thomas Germain's actual death in 1791 or the Count de Saint-Germain's death in 1784. Lastly, when comparing certain facts of his life with the Count de Saint-Germain, the main similarities between this historical figure and the in-game Germain are his mysterious origins, his political connections, and the fact that he claimed to be hundreds of years old, which makes for a rather interesting parallel to the story of the sages, who would be born with memories of their past lives. Overall, although there were many differences between this character's in-game representation and his actual life, after doing the research, much of it can be attributed to the story of the assassins fighting the Templars, along with the fictional concepts of those who came before. And for that reason, Ubisoft had an interesting interpretation of a rather unrecorded historical figure by having him play a rather major role in Unity's story. With that final fact, we have finished another episode of Assassin's Creed, The Real History. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you did, I highly recommend you try out one of the Assassin's Creed games. Thank you all for watching. Please leave any suggestions for future characters, groups, events, or locations from any of the Assassin's Creed games that you'd like me to cover in the comment section below. Please rate, comment, and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you all in a future historical episode.